Okay, can everybody hear me, or do I need the mic? Do I need the mic? Yes? No? Nobody? Good from there? Okay. So no mic. Okay, so I am a PVLan. Chris Mallz is actually my real name. My GitHub, PVLan. My Twitter is PVLan1. If you have any questions, please DM me on Twitter. Okay, so this is the layer 2 nightmare, and essentially this was born. I didn't have a computer job for the longest time, and I was really interested in hacking. I finally got a computer job, but it was a defense job, and so I was handed a network and told to secure it. I had access, to the firewall and access to the AV that they had and everything else, but I essentially sat down and I tapped into their network, and I kept seeing client traffic, right? Like broadcasts from other Windows boxes that were on the network. And I'm like, okay, so I have the firewall log and I can make any rules that I want. How do I stop this? And so that's essentially what this talk was born from, okay? So it's basically networking 101, right? We deal a little bit with layer 2, some time machines because it's really old technology, but what we want is visibility into lateral movement and essentially full client segmentation on a LAN, right? Which sounds really simplistic and easy, but it's not, right? So we're not going to talk about Wi-Fi. I'm not going to talk about IPv6. I'm not really going to talk about anything sort of above layer 3, right? We'll talk about IP addressing, but essentially no. No crazy subnetting is going to be involved here, and no vendors at all. I actually was originally going to work with some vendors for this, and it didn't work out. So to explore this issue, right, we got to know a few things first, okay? So we got to know a little bit about subnetting and layer 2, right? We need to know and understand what a managed switch is, more importantly, what protected ports are on a managed switch. We need to know a little bit about Linux, right? Wireshark. So basically, essentially, we're building a lab, right? So our lab's going to be very simplistic, okay? We'll have two clients. We have client A, client B, and then we'll have a router, right? To make it simple, we're going to color them, okay? So client A is green, client B is blue, and the router's going to be red. Also, we'll need a switch and the router, right? Those are the symbols. I didn't actually know that for a while. So this is our lab, right? The most simplistic, basic lab you can possibly have, okay? So let's go over subnets real quick, right? Every time you look at subnets, all you hear about is math, right? Just how do you calculate a subnet? I've been online so many times and used a subnet calculator. Ultimately, the math part about it is a bunch of crap, okay? We use subnets logically to break up our networks, right? So, servers are over here, so we're going to put them in our little subnet so that way, they can't go over here, right? That's what we essentially use them for, okay? So I'm sure you've probably all seen this, which is basically the subnets. And honestly, unless you're like setting up your static IP or something like that for your ISP, you don't really care about all these, right? You care about 3 of them, okay? These 3. Right? And so these are subnet masks we all use pretty much on a daily basis, right? But that still doesn't actually tell you what a subnet is, okay? So a subnet basically means that any IP address in there talks directly to the other computer, like directly to each other. It doesn't go upstream for anything. It doesn't do anything like that, right? Just directly to the other computer. So now we need to know a little bit about ARP, okay? So ARP works is very simplistic. Very, very simplistic. Essentially, let's say we have client A, it wants to ping out somewhere else to another IP address, right? It's going to reach out and it's going to say, hey, who has this IP address? And it's going to do that with a broadcast to the MAC address FFF. So everybody that's connected basically to this switch is going to see that, right? And then the client, right, if it has that IP address, is going to say, hey, that's me. And it's going to respond and say, I am right here. And it actually knows where client A is because that's in the first packet, right? It actually tells you what IP it's going to and what MAC address, okay? So now we know a little bit about ARP, a little bit about subnets. We need to understand a little bit about switches, okay? This is not a switch. And honestly, when I was doing this whole thing, it sort of confused me because in my brain, I had sort of thought of this as a switch, right? And I think that probably a lot of people sort of make that mistake, I guess, right? So there's 2 different really kinds of switches, okay? There's your unmanaged switch, right, which is basically plug and play. You buy it, you plug it into your router, and then you plug your clients into it, right? They're super dumb. They don't do anything. You can't log into them, right, at all or change any settings because it's unmanaged, okay? So a managed switch, on the other hand, you have like CLI or GUI access, right? And you have all these other special features, okay? And it depends on the vendor, right? Really, ultimately, what features you get. You can have SNMP, port mirroring, and everything else. But what we're really concerned about here, right, is private VLANs and protected ports. And we'll go over what VLANs and private VLANs and protected ports are a little bit. So just remember, this is our lab, right? This is how it's set up. Okay, and so we're going to do just a very simplistic test throughout this whole thing. We're going to set up some ping packets, right? Remember, our end goal here is we want full client segmentation. We want to be able to see all the traffic that goes from client A to client B, which should be very simple, but it's not. So client A starts off, and it's going to send a ping to client B, right? So the first thing that it does, it sends an ARP request. It says, who has address 10.10.10.22, right? It sends this out to everybody, so everybody sees this packet. Client B sees this packet, and responds, it says, hey, look, that's my IP address, right? So it responds to AA and says, I am here, okay? And now client A knows where to send the ping packet, right? So it sends a ping to BBB, BBB responds to A, and all is well, right? And we continue on down the line, okay? But that doesn't get us anything, okay? Now I put these up here in case you can see them, but obviously you can. So while I was going over this, I went over this talk with a buddy of mine, and he said, you know, you should really ask everybody what's missing in this picture. And he had me stumped for like 2 minutes, right? So I ask all of you, what is missing in this picture?
Cat.
The router, actually, because the router doesn't see anything, right? Anyway, so let's go over VLANs real fast. VLANs, it was a really difficult concept for me, but essentially it's just a little tag on every single packet, right? It's just a little tag, right? That's ultimately all VLANs are, right? So VLANs on W are very, very simple. That's how you build them, right? And the private VLANs is actually done on a switch, but essentially what private VLANs does is layer 2 segmentation, okay? So protected ports is essentially what private VLANs are. But basically what it is if you have a switch and you plug your clients in there, none of the clients will be able to talk to any of the other clients, or essentially no port will be able to talk to any other port except for the upstream port. Now your upstream port basically goes into your router or firewall, because they're essentially the same thing most of the time, right? But it's basically just layer 2 segmentation. So we'll use protected ports for this because it's a lot simpler than setting up VLANs, and it's just basically as simplistic as you get it. Now how private VLANs work, we won't go over that, but it's essentially basically like protected ports. Just layer 2 segmentation between all the clients that are plugged into a normal switch, okay? So we've enabled protected ports on our little switch that we have in our little lab, and now we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to have client A ping client B, right? So it ARPs out, says who has 2.2, sends that up to the router, and the router says, I'm sorry, but that is not my IP address, so I really don't care, right? And that's as far as we get. There's like nothing else, right? You cannot communicate to client B at all whatsoever, either in private VLANs or protected port modes. It doesn't work, right? Which is really great for lateral movement because you essentially completely stop it, but, and I'll just quickly tell you, my whole goal was essentially to get a decent sized network all on the same subnet. So it was incredibly easy to manage, right? So you have to be able to talk to client B, or I had to be able to talk to client B. So this is local ProxyARP, right? And this is why I get to talk, because I couldn't find anything about this, honestly. Like, there is information out there, but to be able to do this, it's not really like very prominent, right? So it's been available in the Linux kernel since 2.6.35. That is actually the command of how you enable it. It's very simplistic. You just add it into your Linux configuration file there. And essentially what it does is it responds to any client in its subnet mask, right? And you can actually see the dates here. So it was added in 2010. It was private VLAN section of it was actually first thought up in 2001. And the original idea of actually just ProxyARP, which is something different than local ProxyARP, a little bit different, was in 1987. So it's really old, right? So we're going to do the exact same thing, except we're going to do it on a switch with protected ports enabled and with local ProxyARP on our router, okay? So first thing we do, right, from client A, we ping client B. It ARPs out, says who has 2.2. sends this up to the router and the gateway. And because we've enabled local ProxyARP, the router will actually respond and say, look, that IP address that you're looking for, that's actually me, right? And it will respond back down to client A. Now client A will know to send the ping packet to address 22 because it thinks it's at the router. So it'll send that packet up to the router, right? And the router, if you've done your forwarding properly, will forward that back on down to client B. And client B asks who client A is, it gets the router, and then it sends the ICMP reply packet back, okay? Very simplistic, right? But because of this, because we've enabled local ProxyARP, we now have full visibility into any sort of lateral movement that you have, okay? I apologize, ICMP replies right. So one thing happens when you do this, all right? And that is, if you set up all your forwarding right, you're going to catch ICMP redirects because your router is going to know that there is a shorter path that your packets can travel. So it's going to automatically issue an ICMP redirect. So we have to disable that, right? And that's how you disable it. Real quick note here, I was doing this when I had first done this quite a while ago, and it didn't work, and you actually have to put it in all and the actual interface. So maybe it's a bug, I don't know, but I had to do it there. So this is essentially it, right? And I mean, we can go through this, but we really don't need to because hopefully all of you understand. Essentially what happens is we are just forwarding all of our packets up to the router, right? And then client B sees all of them, but basically the router is pretty much performing man in the middle, right? It just forwards everything back and forth for you, okay? So essentially what happens is everybody gets your router MAC that's on the same subnet, right? It's actually really easy. All of your packets that need to traverse to another client go up through your router and you get full visibility into anything. And you can actually, you know, block them, right? Because if it's your router's a firewall, then you're fine, okay? So essentially that's it, right? There is one caveat, and that is if you make your block rules, right, for iptables, you actually have to make them in the forwarding. This was really, like, I didn't understand this at first because you usually use input and output, right? But you actually have to make these rules in the forwarding table. Okay, so I do have an entire thing up here. I can send you an entire Linux script that builds this lab in 2 seconds, right? Bash script. But essentially, right here is where you would basically allow client A to client B on port 80, and this is basically allowing all the clients to talk as they normally would in a switch. And yeah, it has a funny logging prefix. Logging prefix is actually up there because it was hard to find how to actually log properly. But yeah, so that's basically it. I know it's very simplistic, but at the same time, I found no way to do this. It took me like 2 weeks of research to get this far. And I feel like stopping client-to-client communication is pretty much essential in this day and age, right? But it just doesn't exist. So, yes, please ask me questions. Please, seriously.
How would this scale to very low?
1,000 node, it works. On a 1,000 node network, it works. That I know. That I haven't gone beyond that. I don't know, but on that it works. It works fairly well. So I've had no issues at all. So, does everybody understand this? Yes. Did anybody know this before this talk? Okay, that scares me. You did know this?
No.
Oh, you have a question? Okay, yes, please.
How bad was the traffic load? Because if you're forwarding everything through the router,
Right. So here's the thing. Clients don't need to talk to each other on networks at all, really. Like I mean, sometimes they do, but they really don't, right? So all you really, and so what I would recommend if you're gonna like build this up into your existing setup or something, still keep subnets, right? You still keep VLANs, okay? I hate VLANs personally, but that's just me, right? So keep your VLANs, right? As long as you put like your servers or your Active Directory in a VLAN, okay, you're not gonna be going back down the path, okay? You're gonna be going out of it, right? And so that's what I would say. But the rest of it, you can absolutely enable it. Because like, for instance, we pretty much all break our networks up, right, into where clients are and where servers are, you know, but clients just don't need to talk to other clients, right? Yes?
how would you make exceptions for that? Like, so let's say you've got a whole help desk group that need to be able to talk to all the workstations in the network.
So the way that I would do that personally, right, is I would go in and I would sit on a tap first. I find out what they need to talk to, or just pull the firewall logs, right? And then I would go in and I would actually make the IP tables rules or the firewall rules specifically for the traffic that they want to be allowed. Okay. There is a little problem in that no major firewall vendors support this at all. Although PFSense does, so you can use that. But yeah, that's essentially how I do it. I would make, and you can actually see it right here, because this is like for port 80, but these would just be 443 or whatever you wanted, right?
So yeah, I guess you would have to have their own, you'd have to know what subnets are coming from to set up the IP tables appropriately.
Yeah, you'd have to know, like you have to tap the traffic first to be able to see it, or at least pull logs or something first
So
before
if
you can.
you've got like a VPN environment where they're just falling in pools of random IPs, then
Yeah, so in this setup, I did MAC binding, right, for IP addresses. I mean, I went crazy with it, right? So that won't happen on there. But yeah, essentially, like for VLANs, your VLANs are actually depending on how you have, your VPNs, essentially how you have your VPNs depends on your firewall, right? And they already have this, right? Because you're VPN'd in and it has to bridge through the firewall itself, so your firewall is already going to see all the traffic. So if you just have everybody VPN in, you're fine, right? All the clients just VPN into the firewall first, which is possible. I have done that too. So, yeah. Yes?
How do you propose preventing the overload of firewall or router? Because all decisions being made from that to the client, basically leveraging a lot of software and fine.
Right.
Instructions. And then, in my mind, I see an opportunity to try to root that all service because
Right.
overload that particular
Right.
device and now your entire network's out.
Yes.
Segment, so like on the switch.
Right. So you could actually segment it quite a bit more. So like major firewalls, right? They have multiple different ports on them, right? This is essentially would only, like if you were to DOS this, it would only take down that port, right? Unless it was like a firewall DOS. But if you were to DOS, say, the switch, it would only take down what's on that port. Because this only I apologize, it doesn't only work, but this specific concept, right, only works on one interface, okay? So it would basically, if you had a Linux box with like 4 NIC cards, right, this is only going to work on one of those NIC cards that you have your switch plugged in and your clients that come out of it, right? It wouldn't take out the other NIC cards that, feed whatever else, like your domain controller or your servers or anything like that. As for like a DDoS against it, I have not tried. I cannot speak to that. I did do, I actually just did ARP spoofing, and ARP spoofing, it kind of works, but it doesn't really. So I wish I could give you all the results. I just can't yet. So.
I'd be curious to see how actually load take.
Yeah,
hardware.
Right. So most of the major switches that I've seen nowadays usually have like 10 gig uplink ports, right? And so that would basically solve your overload problem, right? If you had, say you had, 24 clients, right? Or 48 clients, right? And then they were all on gigabit speeds, and then you had your 10 gig uplink. But seriously, clients really shouldn't be talking to other clients anyways, right? And so, I mean, ultimately they shouldn't. Like, if you could have a file server, like if they need to share files, you have a file server, something like that. There's really no reason other than actual lateral movement to have 2, say, Windows boxes directly talk to another Windows box, unless it's like client or server. You know what I'm saying?
You got the printer that's sitting right
You
there.
put yes, that is true. So I don't have printers. We all plug them in directly to the box itself, but that's me. Yes.
So, I want to put a question out to the group. Does anybody have a use case where clients need to be talking to one
Yeah,
another?
that's a good question, too.
There is some with
Broadcast and Apple breaks it basically.
Help desk, remote, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
something like
jump
that.
boxes.
Jump boxes.
Yeah, there's
You can put a jump box outside of the zone though. So yeah, so with major firewalls, what I found is basically they have ports in the back, and essentially those are like zones, right? And so you take a zone for like your servers, and then you take a zone for like your clients or whatever else, or you break them up for like sales, and then like your SOC or something like that, right? But that's essentially how like most people do major firewalls, is you split them up into zones. But anytime you take something and you put it in another zone, this has no effect on it because it's actually traversing out another port, and that's when normal firewall rules come into account, right? So this is only something that's on the same NIC as your firewall sees. Yeah, per interface, essentially, yes.
I asked the question not only to generate some discussion, but also for my own edification, because I preach this all the time when we do red team engagements. It's like, why should my machine ever be talking to all these other machines on the network?
Well,
And you don't get a log of it either anywhere, except on the clients. And that's what scared me.
Windows updates, another tab.
Yeah.
It could.
No, they have the Windows Update sharing, the peering.
Share-
Yeah, which should be disabled in GPO anyways.
I agree.
Seriously, and you should have a WSUS or you should have a server that's doing all of your updates,
I'll give you another
which is a
reason.
pain in the ass if you ever try to
really
implement it.
use a server If you've got like an MPLS, the person don't want to put a server necessarily at.
Yeah, that's
every
true. Yeah.
site. You could leverage this for you get one
Yeah.
box and say.
So there are cases in large organizations.
AV's also my.
AV looks like that too.
There are endpoint agents for some security tools that use a peer-to-peer kind of sharing model because they don't have a single path back to the server.
Right.
They actually bump through they change through other peers. There are software deployment tools that also have this peer-to-peer.
Yeah, and so like what is it? There's a really big tool that everybody uses to like track all of their assets. It's an asset like management. It's huge. I can't remember the name of it.
ServiceNow?
No, not ServiceNow. It's
Spiceworks?
no, it's not SpiceWorks. No, it's huge. You have to install it on every box, and it basically it's essentially a botnet. It's a massive botnet, and it basically it does this and it does peer-to-peer to track everything, right? And that would break it. What was it called? No, I can't remember. It was developed. The Air Force used it at one point. I don't remember.
Tanium?
Yeah, that's it. Tanium.
Okay.
Tanium. This will break Tanium.
Do you know
Yes.
sort of utilization, would you work on some utilization on that router when you were actually?
Since I can't hear. That's it.
Utilization on that router.
Yeah.
In your, regular day-to-day usage.
Yeah.
Seeing a higher spike?
No.
in Those particular.
No, because I mean, like there was like almost no traffic, anyways, to begin with. From when I first enabled and I logged it, there was almost no traffic that was supposed to come out. And so, and I can just tell you right now, are we still recording? Actually.
We can stop it, not that we're broadcasting.
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
just saying.
Oh yeah, no, fine. As long as we stop it here.